All right, let's talk about arousal and memory, and from a bit of a neurobiological perspective. This slide from a review article that George Mashur, Bev Orser, and I published in the journal Anesthesiology a couple of years back, titled Intraoperative Awareness from Neurobiology to Clinical Practice. This is actually a figure showing nuclei associated with wakefulness and sleep. And this is work done by Ralph Leidig and Helen Bagdoyan at the University of Michigan. And what's striking from this slide is that you'll see that we have a fairly good idea of the nuclei involved in wakefulness and non-REM sleep. And the red ones are the active brain areas, where the blue ones are the inactive brain areas. So a very important area, for example, is the VILPO, or the ventrolateral preoptic area, which becomes active during non-REM sleep and inhibits the arousal nuclei, which are all the red nuclei, and actually then promotes sleep. During general anesthesia, we know that VILPO is active, but many of the other nuclei that are active during wakefulness, we're not sure whether they're active, inactive, or in a different state during general anesthesia, and indeed whether other important nuclei are involved. However, it is nonetheless clear that there are some important overlaps between non-REM sleep and general anesthesia with a GABAergic anesthetic agent. The extent of the overlap is not completely appreciated, and this is an active line of investigation. What are the similarities and differences between general anesthesia and natural sleep? This figure illustrates how the ventrolateral preoptic area sends inhibitory signals to all of these arousal pathways like the basal forebrain and other important arousal pathways in the brainstem to inhibit the arousal mechanisms and perhaps to trigger a switch from a wakeful state to a state of sleep. And the notion of a flip-flop switch where you either are in an aroused state or in an unaroused state is one that has been put forward by Cliff Saper and others. In relation to intraoperative awareness, which is really the focus of what I'm talking about, there are important brain areas involved in memory: explicit memory, traumatic memory, and implicit memory. And explicit memory involves areas like the hippocampus, the medial temporal lobe, the parahippocampal gyrus, the prefrontal cortex, and diffusely in the neocortex. Those are all areas that will be involved in explicit memory formation. With traumatic memory and implicit memory, there are other brain areas involved. And importantly, the amygdala, which sits here at the end of the hippocampus, is probably involved in emotional and traumatic memory. One of the important points here is that it is probably the case that these memories are dissociable from each other. So you could have implicit memory without forming explicit memory, which is not entirely surprising to us. We know that we implicitly learn things without always having to think about them explicitly. So intuitively, you know that. But it is probably true that the same could occur during surgery if you had intraoperative awareness. You could have implicit memories which could have impact, although we don't know that for sure.